Hello, high schoolers. This is Skill Builder 12, and for the next few weeks, we are going to be talking about major scales. This is important information for any musician to know, and it's going to help you make connections between a lot of the things that we have been talking about in class. And if you're planning on participating in the NYSSMA Solo Festival in May, this will be extra important for you because you know part of that process is learning and playing some scales. And depending on the level solo you're doing, you'll either need to prepare 7 or 15 major scales. So make sure you're really paying attention because this will give you the foundation of those major scales so you can really understand what they're asking you to do. So make sure you have your worksheet. Most of this we will complete together, but there will be a little bit that I'm going to ask you to complete on your own. And we can start by writing our name so that way I know that you did the work and can give you credit for it. So make sure your name is right on top. And we're going to start by talking about whole steps and half steps. Before we even get into scales, we need to understand the building blocks of those scales. So the first thing, a half step, is the smallest interval in music. That means it's two notes that are the closest that two notes can possibly be. You can figure this out on your string instrument, but it is easier to do it by looking at a piano. And I have here in the definition of half step that you can also figure this out by looking at adjacent keys on the piano. Adjacent means right next to each other. And so, for example, if I looked at the key C and asked you what one half step higher would be, that would be the next key, which is the black key, right? The D has a key in between it, so it would be up here on C sharp or D flat. That key has two different names, so either answer would be correct. You could call it C sharp or D flat, and you would be correct. Later, we'll talk about how to know what to call it in the scale, but for now, you could choose either answer. Now let's look at a whole step. A whole step is just two half steps. So we were on the key C, we went to C sharp or D flat, which was one half step higher. The next key is D. And so one whole step higher than C is D because it's two half steps apart. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to do a little bit of practice right now. So the first question is, which note is a half step higher than F? Here's F. The next key is this black key. It's either F sharp or G flat, and either of those answers would be correct. I am going to write F sharp. Okay, next we have which note is higher than D, a half step higher, than D. Here's D, the next note is up here. It's either D sharp or E flat. I'll call this one E flat. All right, and this one's a little bit more challenging. Which note is a half step higher than E? Up until this point, we've either been going from a white key to a black key or from a black key to a white key. In this case, the next key is another white key. There isn't a black key in between. So one half step higher than E is F. Of course, those white keys are all natural notes, so it's an F natural, but you don't need to write that. F implies that it's F natural. All right, the next question. Now we're doing whole steps. Which note is a whole step higher than F? Here's F, half step, half step. One whole step higher than F is G. Which note is a whole step higher than D? Half step, it's an E. And which note is a whole step higher than E? Half step to F and half step to this key, F sharp or G flat. I will call it G flat, but again, either answer would be correct. So hopefully this makes sense, and by the next day one, I should be able to quiz you on any of these and say, what's a whole step higher than D? And you should be able to tell me with confidence, okay? All right, so now let's go down to talk about what specifically makes a scale a major scale, because there are different types of scales, and a major scale has specific characteristics to it. So the first characteristic of a major scale is that it has 7 pitches. Now, you might think to maybe when we play a D major scale in class, and you might say, hang on a second, when I play a D major scale, I play 8 notes. And you're correct. But the first and last note are the same. They're both D. And so regardless of the octave that you play it in, a D is a D. It counts as one pitch. And so if we're giving the actual definition of a major scale, it has 7 different pitches, although when you play a 1-octave scale, you play 8 notes. Hopefully that makes sense, but we're just going to make sure we are following the definition exactly. 7 pitches, but you play 8 notes. The next thing is that major scales will start and end on a pitch named in the key. What that means is that the name of the scale will tell you the starting and ending note. A D major scale starts on a D and ends on a D. That means that even if the scale is something you've never played before or that you don't feel confident playing, you can be confident playing the first and last note. If I ask you to play a G flat major scale, you can say, Miss Allen, we've never learned how to do that. But you should say, but I do know the first note and the last note is a G flat, right? So it starts and ends on the pitch that's named in the key. Next, all major scales have successive letter names. Let's write that big word, Successive. Successive means one right after the other. That means that the notes in the scale will follow the musical alphabet. You will never go from a G to a B, right? And that's a tough example. Let me give a different note. You'll never go from a D to an F because in between D and F is the note E. So after you play a D in the scale, the next note will either be an E or an E flat or an E sharp, but you'll never jump right to F. You'll always have the letters following the musical alphabet. And that example I gave first was challenging because after G, the next successive letter is A, right? We go back to the beginning of the musical alphabet. That's going to be very important in a moment when we look at building major scales. This last thing is the specific pattern of whole steps and half steps that every major scale has. You may not realize this, but every single major scale has the same pattern of whole and half steps. It's why our ears can recognize scales as scales. And so I'm actually going to write it over here to make it a little bit bigger. The pattern of whole and half steps in a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. It would not hurt to memorize this, and probably through the work we're about to do, you'll start to commit it to memory just a little bit anyway. Now I'm going to zoom out because I want to be able to see the keyboard and do this next part. So that's not bad, but let me zoom out just a little bit more. Okay, perfect. So now we're looking at building major scales. So the first question says, write the pitches for a D major scale. Now, most of you can probably just do that from memory. We've been playing a D major scale since the 4th grade. However, I want you to see the process of doing it. And I picked an easy scale on purpose because I want you to see at the end that it is correct with what you've known since the 4th grade. And so the first thing we are going to do is follow one of those rules of major scales, which is that it starts and ends on the name of the key. So it's a D major scale, which means we are going to start on the note D, right? Now we have to follow this pattern of whole and half steps. So it says after the D, you're going to go one whole step. Go down to your keyboard. One whole step above D is E. And I actually am going to switch to doing this in a different color because I am going to mark off the whole and half steps as we go. So my first note was D, and then I said the next note, one whole step higher than D, is E. Checking off that whole step, we just did the whole step. Okay, now I'm on E. I need to go a whole step higher. 1, 2. Now this is where that successive letter names comes in because I could either call this note F sharp or G flat, but I know that it needs to be some sort of F because after E comes F. So I'm going to call it F sharp. It would not be correct to call this note G flat. So here's F sharp. There's a whole step. Next, I need a half step. F sharp to G is a half step. Another whole step. Hopefully this is getting easy for you with the whole steps and half steps. G to A, 1, 2, right? I need another whole step. A, 1, 2, B. Now I need another whole step, but I'm going to run out of keys. So I want you to watch carefully what I'm doing. B to C is 1/2 step. This is a C, but down here is also a C. So I've gone 1/2 step. I'm going to go an additional half step to make it a whole step. Here's C sharp or D flat. Think of that successive letter name rule. We can't call it D flat because after B in the musical alphabet comes C. So we're going to call it C sharp. And then finally, we need to do one more whole step, or excuse me, half step, which would be C sharp to D. Now, if you look at these notes, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. That is the D major scale you know and love that you've been playing since the 4th grade. But hopefully now you can see why it's that way, right? It follows all of those rules of the major scale, and it has the pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? Let's do one more together, and then I'll tell you what I'd like you to do for your homework here. Let me rewrite the pattern of whole and half steps. I'll write it right here. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That way I can do the checking off like I did last time. That makes it a little bit easier for us to see how this all comes together. We're going to write the pitches for a C major scale. So, of course, I'm going to start on the note C. Then I'm going to go one whole step, 1, 2, to the note D. Another whole step, 1, 2, to the note E. Some of you might be able to do this faster than I am, but I'm going slowly just to demonstrate for people who still need it to see each whole step and half step come together. A half step above E is F. Check that off. Another whole step, 1, 2, to G. Another whole step, 1, 2, to A. Another whole step, A, 1, 2, to B. And finally, one half step of B to A, C. Now, I picked this scale on purpose because I wanted you to see in this case, there were no accidentals. I didn't fall on any black keys. And we have played in the key of C major before. You all know that is a key with no sharps and no flats. Other than this key signature, you will always have at least one sharp or one flat note. So we got this one out of the way so you could see how that pattern of whole and half steps gave us all natural notes. Okay, and again, we just did 2 examples that hopefully made a lot of sense to you. It's just going in that order of whole and half steps and using that keyboard to help us. So now you, for homework, are going to show me what you know. And here's what I'd like you to do. The first thing I'd like you to do is write the pitches for an A major scale. This is on the back of your paper. I included a second copy of the keyboard so you didn't have to keep flipping back and forth. So you're going to do exactly what we did up here. You're going to obviously start on the letter A, and that's the only hint I'm going to give you, which you probably didn't need. But you're going to start on A and work your way through this pattern of whole and half steps to get your major scale. So it should look like what we have up here. And then you're going to draw the notes for an A major scale on the staff. And I gave you a couple of hints to help you. First of all, you need to make sure that you include your clef. So whatever instrument you play, you can include your clef on the left-hand side. That's how we're going to know that the notes you're writing are the notes you're writing. And to make sure you draw the sharps and flats to the left of the note heads. So when you write letter names like this, the sharp goes to the right. It's F sharp. But in music, and I'm just going to draw a random note because all of you play different instruments and read different clefs. But if I drew this, we'll call that letter X. If I want to call it X sharp, you put the sharp on the left, okay? So you only need to go going up in the A major scale, but show me what an A major scale would look like on your in your clef, writing it on the staff, okay? That should not take you more than 5 to 10 minutes. Bring this back to me. This was a little bit more of a complex skill builder, so there will definitely have to be treats for people who complete this and hand it in. So you have until the next day 1 to do this. We will review it in class. And thanks so much for watching your skill builder. I hope everyone has a great day, and I will see you in class.